Hi, my name is Alex, and today I learned that in my house, cooking pasta is apparently a group activity, even when you don't invite anyone. It was supposed to be a peaceful day. No work, no errands, no responsibilities breathing down my neck. The morning light was slipping through the blinds in golden stripes. The apartment was quiet, and my stomach gave that impatient growl that says, "Feed me now, or else." I didn't want anything complicated. Not a big breakfast, not some experimental recipe from a cooking channel. I just wanted pasta. Plain, boiled pasta. No sauce, no cheese, nothing fancy. Just the kind of food you make when you want to eat without thinking about it. The plan was simple. Grab a pot, fill it with water, turn on the stove, toss in the pasta, wait a few minutes, drain, and done. 10 minutes from start to finish. No stress, no drama. I even told myself out loud, as if making a sacred oath. This time, I will not get distracted. This time, I will just cook the pasta, eat it, and that's it. I walked into the kitchen, humming something random, and opened the cupboard. There it was, my trusty metal pot, slightly scratched from years of service, but reliable as always. I lifted it out, the cool steel feeling solid in my hands. I was picturing the perfect scene, me sitting at the table, a steaming plate of pasta in front of me, maybe a cup of tea on the side. 10 peaceful, solitary minutes of boiling noodles. But I had no idea that this was about to turn into one of the most chaotic cooking experiences of my life. And it would all begin before I even managed to fill the pot with water. I had just set the pot on the counter and reached for the tap when I heard a voice behind me. "Oh, pasta? I know how to make that. Wait, let me help." I froze. That voice wasn't supposed to be here. I turned around, and it was my grandfather. Now, to fully understand my confusion, you need to know something. My grandfather lives in another city. A different region, in fact. The man is retired, allergic to travel, and the last time he came to visit was 3 years ago for my birthday. Yet here he was, standing in my kitchen like he just popped down the street. "Grandpa," I blinked. "How, what? When did you even get here?" He waved his hand dismissively, like my questions were irrelevant. "Doesn't matter. What matters is, are you using cold water? You must use cold water. The molecules behave better that way." I just stared at him. "The molecules?" Yes, he said, walking over and taking the pot from my hands like I was some rookie who couldn't be trusted with metal objects. "If you start with hot water, the pasta comes out lazy. Lazy, limp, no spirit. You want pasta with courage, you start with cold." I was about to ask whether pasta could, in fact, possess courage, but he was already at the sink, turning on the tap and squinting at the water like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. "You see this? This is good water. City water has minerals. Minerals give strength." I was still trying to process how my grandfather had materialized in my apartment when he suddenly leaned toward me, whispering as if revealing state secrets. "Also, salt must be added only after the water is dancing." Dancing? Yes. Tiny bubbles. Not big ones. Big ones are too violent, they shock the pasta. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, he pointed at my cupboard. "Do you have bay leaves?" "No. Never mind, I'll check myself." And just like that, my solitary lunch had been hijacked. Grandpa was still hovering over the sink, muttering about water temperature when the doorbell rang. It was an urgent, impatient ring, 2 quick chimes like the person on the other side couldn't wait another second. I dried my hands on a towel and opened the door. There stood my neighbor, Nick, middle-aged, wearing his usual sleeveless undershirt, holding a mug of tea like it was part of his body. He leaned forward slightly, eyebrows raised. "You cooking pasta?" "Yes," I said slowly. "I thought so." I heard the pot clank through the wall. I blinked. "You heard my pot." "Thin walls," he said, shrugging. "Anyway, I'll just come in and make sure you're doing it right." Before I could respond, he brushed past me into the kitchen like this was his apartment. The first thing he did was lift the lid off my pot. Except the pot didn't even have water in it yet. Grandpa looked up from the sink, startled. "Who are you?" "I'm the neighbor," Nick said casually. "And you're filling that wrong." I raised my hands. "Okay, first of all, it's my pasta. Second, the water hasn't even touched the pot yet." Nick ignored me and turned to Grandpa. "You salt before the boil, right?" Grandpa's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the pot handle. Absolutely not. Salt shocks the molecules too early. Nick sipped his tea. That's ridiculous. You need to build the flavor from the start. And just like that, my kitchen became the scene of a culinary debate between a man who somehow teleported from another city and my neighbor, who apparently had nothing better to do on a Tuesday afternoon than argue about water chemistry. Meanwhile, I stood there, the supposed chef of this meal, and realized I hadn't even touched the stove yet. The debate between Grandpa and Nick was reaching a dangerous level of passion. Grandpa was gesturing with the pot like it was a weapon, while Nick sipped his tea in smug defiance when the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't the quick, impatient ring from before. It was one long, deliberate press. The kind of ring that says, "I'm not leaving until you open this door." I sighed, bracing myself, and went to answer it. There stood my mom. She wasn't holding flowers or cake like a normal visiting mother. No, she was gripping a small, crumpled paper bag as if it contained priceless treasure. Her eyes darted past me straight to the kitchen. "Don't trust the neighbor," she said as her opening line, stepping inside without so much as a hello. "They always oversalt everything." Nick, hearing this from the kitchen, choked on his tea. "Excuse me." Mom ignored him completely. She held the bag up to my face. "I brought real salt." I frowned. "What's wrong with the salt I already have?" "It's from a store," she said, her tone dripping with disapproval. "Full of chemicals. This is mine. I dried it myself last summer." Grandpa perked up at that, finally lowering the pot. "Homemade salt? That's rare these days." Nick rolled his eyes. "Salt is salt." Mom gasped as if he'd just insulted her ancestors. "Salt is not just salt. This one still remembers the sea." At this point, my brain was starting to short-circuit. 3 adults were now in my kitchen, 2 of them debating seasoning philosophy, one of them holding a pot hostage, and the stove was still stone cold. I thought about reminding them that all I wanted was to boil a handful of pasta for myself. But something told me they weren't going to listen. The debate between Grandpa and Nick was reaching a dangerous level of passion. Grandpa was gesturing with the pot like it was a weapon, while Nick sipped his tea in smug defiance when the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't the quick, impatient ring from before. It was one long, deliberate press. The kind of ring that says, "I'm not leaving until you open this door." I sighed, bracing myself, and went to answer it. There stood my mom. She wasn't holding flowers or cake like a normal visiting mother. No, she was gripping a small, crumpled paper bag as if it contained priceless treasure. Her eyes darted past me straight to the kitchen. "Don't trust the neighbor," she said as her opening line, stepping inside without so much as a hello. "They always oversalt everything." Nick, hearing this from the kitchen, choked on his tea. "Excuse me." Mom ignored him completely. She held the bag up to my face. "I brought real salt." I frowned. "What's wrong with the salt I already have?" "It's from a store," she said, her tone dripping with disapproval. "Full of chemicals. This is mine. I dried it myself last summer." Grandpa perked up at that, finally lowering the pot. "Homemade salt? That's rare these days." Nick rolled his eyes. "Salt is salt." Mom gasped as if he'd just insulted her ancestors. "Salt is not just salt. This one still remembers the sea." At this point, my brain was starting to short-circuit. 3 adults were now in my kitchen, 2 of them debating seasoning philosophy, one of them holding a pot hostage, and the stove was still stone cold. I thought about reminding them that all I wanted was to boil a handful of pasta for myself. But something told me they weren't going to listen. The verbal storm was still raging. Mom defending the soul of spiral pasta, Grandpa lecturing on pasta courage, and Nick suggesting we just order Chinese when the doorbell rang again. 3 sets of eyes turned toward the hallway. I groaned. "Please no." But of course I opened the door. And there she was, my ex. She stood in the doorway like she owned the place, holding a plastic bottle of ketchup in one hand and a small tote bag in the other. Her smile was that infuriatingly calm, knowing kind of smile that used to drive me insane when we were dating. "Hey," she said casually, as if it was completely normal to show up unannounced. "I heard you're making pasta." "How?" I asked, my voice already dripping with suspicion. She tilted her head. "Oh, Word gets around. I glance back toward the kitchen, where Grandpa was craning his neck to get a better look, and Nick was peeking around the corner like a nosy neighbor in a sitcom. Which, to be fair, he actually was. "What's in the bag?" I asked, pointing at the tote. She lifted it slightly, revealing not just ketchup, but also a small jar of mayonnaise, a lemon, and, unless my eyes were deceiving me, a tin of cherry compote. "What, exactly, do you plan to do with that?" She shrugged. "Thought you might need sauce." From the kitchen, Mom's voice rang out like a fire alarm. "We are not using ketchup." My ex leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't worry, I'll handle her." Before I could stop her, she walked straight into the kitchen, set the ketchup bottle down next to the pot, which was still unbelievably empty, and gave everyone a polite nod. Grandpa smiled at her like they were old war buddies. Nick raised his mug in a silent toast. Mom looked like she was about to faint. And me? I just leaned against the doorway and thought I really should have just made a sandwich. By some miracle, or maybe just because they ran out of things to argue about for 5 seconds, I managed to wrestle the pot from Grandpa's hands, fill it with water, and set it on the stove. The click-click whoosh of the gas igniting felt like a victory fanfare. But my victory was short-lived. Almost immediately, all 4 of them leaned in over the pot as if it were a newborn baby. Mom stood to my left, Grandpa to my right, Nick diagonally behind me, and my ex directly opposite, arms crossed like she was supervising. The steam hadn't even started yet, but their eyes were fixed on that pot like we were launching a rocket to Mars. So, Nick began, breaking the silence. "What shape are we going with?" Grandpa waved him off. "Doesn't matter. The texture is what counts." Mom glared at him. "Of course it matters. Spirals hold more sauce. It's science. We're not making sauce." I reminded them for what felt like the 10th time. "Oh, we will," my ex said with a smirk, lightly patting the tote bag on the counter. I decided not to engage. Instead, I reached into the cupboard and grabbed the first pack of pasta I saw. Plain spaghetti. The moment I placed it on the counter, the room fell silent, then exploded into overlapping protests. "You're not serious. That's the most boring choice. Spaghetti without meat is just sad." Grandpa started rummaging in the cupboard for something with more character. Mom tried to snatch the spaghetti from my hands. Nick began searching my shelf for penne. My ex just stood there, watching the chaos unfold with a faint, satisfied smile. By the time I managed to get everyone to back off, the water was finally starting to form tiny bubbles. The pot, at least, seemed to understand the plan. Unfortunately, the people in the room didn't. Just when I thought we might finally be moving forward, Nick pulled out his phone and suggested we hold a vote. "A democratic approach," he said, as if we were electing a president, not picking pasta shapes. Mom raised an eyebrow but nodded. Grandpa grumbled but agreed. Even my ex shrugged and said, "Fine, let's vote." The options: Nick, penne; Mom, spirals; Grandpa, buckwheat, because apparently that counts as pasta now. Me, well, no vote. I just wanted spaghetti. The tension was thick as each person defended their choice like it was a matter of life and death. "I'm telling you, penne holds the sauce better." Nick insisted. "No, spirals catch every bit of flavor." Mom fired back. Buckwheat. Grandpa just shook his head. "You're all wasting time. Real food doesn't need fancy shapes." Meanwhile, my ex, silent until then, opened a fresh pack of spaghetti and quietly poured it into the pot. The room froze. Everyone turned to look at her like she'd just declared war. "How dare you?" Nick exclaimed. Mom gasped. "That's not what we agreed." Grandpa sighed. "At least it's not buckwheat." I just stood there, watching this pasta soap opera unfold. And that's when I realized this wasn't about cooking pasta anymore. It was about winning a battle no one wanted to fight. Just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, Mom suddenly shouted from across the kitchen, "Stop! You didn't wash the pasta." I froze mid-step. "Wait, what?" Mom marched over, eyes blazing. "You have to rinse it first. Otherwise, all the starch sticks and it turns into a sticky mess." "Mom," I said carefully, "I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to wash pasta before cooking." "No, you always wash it." Before I could protest, she grabbed the pot from the stove, despite the boiling water and the now soggy spaghetti inside, and rushed over to the sink. "Mom, wait. Don't." But it was too late. She tipped the whole pot and poured the water out along with the pasta. A collective gasp filled the room. Grandpa almost dropped his phone, Nick nearly spilled his tea, and my ex just looked amused. "We start over," Mom declared. "This time it'll be perfect." Meanwhile, my ex was already mixing her special sauce, an eyebrow-raising concoction of ketchup, mayonnaise, and something suspiciously like cherry compote. Nick nodded approvingly. Modern cuisine. Grandpa was on the phone with his chef friend, apparently seeking confirmation on the right recipe. Mom was chopping onions like she was preparing for a feast, even though all I wanted was plain pasta. And me? I was standing at the sidelines, wondering if I'd ever seen my simple lunch again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pasta was ready. The water boiled over twice. The kitchen floor was sticky with spilled sauce, and the counters were cluttered with dirty dishes, half-empty condiment bottles, and a suspiciously soggy pack of buckwheat. We gathered around the table, a mismatched crowd of 4 adults and me, staring down at plates piled with something that had once been spaghetti but now looked more like a pink, salty swamp. Nick, ever the optimist, took the first bite and nodded thoughtfully. "Well, interesting." Mom smiled weakly, trying to hide her disappointment. "Not bad," she said, "for plain pasta." Grandpa chuckled. "It's definitely unique. An original recipe." My ex just smirked, clearly proud of her special sauce that had turned the noodles a strange shade of pink. And me? I took one bite, then quietly pushed my plate aside and reached for a cup of tea. At that moment, the doorbell rang again. A pizza delivery guy stood there, holding a large box. "You ordered pizza?" Turns out, my ex had called for delivery hours ago, just in case. I sighed, laughing quietly to myself. So that was my day. I just wanted to boil some pasta. Instead, I got a kitchen full of chefs, a science experiment in a pot, and a half-eaten pizza for dinner. And you know what? I'm never cooking alone again.